Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, in the house today. How excited am I? Avivah Wittenberg-Cox. Avivah, welcome to the show. Short bio, and then we're going to get into all things longevity, might I say. So Avivah is a global expert on 21st century leadership, gender, and generational balance, longevity, and the future of work and careers. She helps individuals and organizations manage the consequences and the opportunities, of course, of the new gender and generational balance of workforces and consumers. Themes summarized in her graphic book, Thriving to 100 Through Life's Four Quarters, and featured, of course, on her podcast, Four Quarter Lives, and her weekly Substack titled Elderberries. Avivah is a visiting lecturer at Oxford Said Business School, runs a Thriving to 100 program for INSEAD alumni, and is co-director of Catholica, I always say that wrong, Catholica Lisbon's Longevity Leadership Executive Education Program. She's an adjunct prof at DePaul University in Chicago and is the author of the best-selling books Why and How Women Mean Business of Wiley. An ambassador for the Stanford Center on Longevity and, mutually, our Global Peter Drucker Forum. Avivah sits on the board of the National Innovation Center on Aging. And in 2023, I was so privileged to be in the audience when Avivah was inducted into the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame. Talk about a pedigree. Avivah, thank you so much.
Mouthful. Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
No, not a mouthful.
I'll pay you later.
I keep going. I took out about 8 minutes of your accolades and experience. So speaking of experience, what we wanted to get in today, of course, is sort of topics in and around generational, intergenerational, longevity. So maybe we want to start with longevity. So how do you define it, and why has it been such perhaps a passion of yours in terms of where you see society going and maybe even where we're in already?
And longevity makes for very long bios, doesn't it? You just keep adding things.
Yeah.
So it ends up being those 8-minute bios. Listen, I think I often say that longevity and age is to the 21st century what gender was to the 20th. It's one of these massive demographic shifts that you and I are not exactly the front end, but we're pretty close to the front end of the big shift. I suspect we're both in our 60s, maybe not. I don't want to make any presumptions here. I am anyway, and I think, there's 1 billion people over 60 in the world today.
Yeah.
And we're heading by 2050 to the 2nd billion.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody listening to this who is probably part of either the first or the 2nd billion, and that's going to change the course of human history. It already is, and I think people aren't necessarily registering this as the dramatic shift that it is. There's a hell of a lot of focus on AI and climate change, quite rightly, but there's one third pillar of those big disruptions that is missing, and that's this new demographics.
Yeah, I mean, from a statistics perspective, currently 2024, we sit. You're right, just over 1 billion of folks who are 65 and older, and we're encroaching on the 2 billion mark to that 2nd billion. So, what are we not seeing then? If this sort of seems like the sleuthing that's going on is not very evident to leaders, particularly in organizations. This is a problem, but it's also an opportunity, it seems. And I sort of couch my question there, but how come it's a problem? And then we'll probably get into opportunities, I hope. But why is it feeling like there's so much blindness in senior leaders on this very real statistic?
Well, I think it's relatively new, not in the data, but in the popular consciousness. I think it's been only arriving in the mainstream media more consistently and dramatically since the pandemic. So that's pretty new.
Yeah.
And I think, again, having done a lot of work on gender over the last 20 years, we're kind of on age where we were on gender 20 years ago. You know, it was clear in the data, but to get it onto a leadership agenda takes urgency, burning bushes, education, awareness raising, all of which we are now, you and I and many others, engaged on, but it'll take a few years, right, of us crying wolf to get people to notice. Why it's an issue and an opportunity is because it's going to become a half the labor force is going to be over 50. I used to talk about gender balance, 50-50 men and women. Now I talk about generational balance. Half the labor force, half the consumer base is over 50 and the other half is under 50. And we're not just thinking that way.
Mm.
Not
Well,
yet.
sometimes money talks, right, Aviva? And so if we look at the U.S. economy alone, roughly speaking, again, depends what data source, but as of roughly 2024, the over 50s in the U.S. economy account for something neighborhood of $9 trillion. And if so, our over 50 population, over 60 population increases, it seems to me that that economic infusion is going to increase as well. So is it sort of where court or horse before the cart here, or cart before the horse, where leaders, if we start talking economic principles, they might actually pay attention more?
Yes, I mean, yes, and that's what we're doing, of course. It's got multiple layers of economics. It's labor force economics, it's consumer-based economics. There's all kinds of data swilling around.
Hmm.
Um, and that data bumps up against, you know, other burning priorities, inertia and ageism. Ageism is pretty baked into a lot of us. So yeah, you talk about the trillions that are spent and the trillions in assets that are all the money is in the hands of what I call the Q3 consumer. Getting companies to focus on that, if you look at where marketing spend is going, as you know, I'm sure it's often less than 5% that goes to this massive and fast growing demographic. Why? Well, because marketing departments are young, they're hip, they're trendy, and focusing on people like us ain't very sexy, Dan. I hate to tell you. Or it is, but they don't know just how sexy it is.
Well, it seems such a conundrum, right? With such an economic possibility of increased revenues, profitability, opportunities, but then again, inside the workforce, if society is aging, and as you know all too well, that the difference between the fluid intelligence or competence and the sort of crystallized competence intelligence, you've got people in the organization who probably would like to work, maybe not full time, but there's this experience well of opportunity that sits there as well. So not only are organizations perhaps not thinking about what the economic benefits are they also equally not thinking about that sort of crystallized intelligence benefits of the experience that might be sitting right there at their doorstep? So how do you unpack that for us?
Oh, it's very simple. You don't have to unpack anything. Again, anybody over 50 in the corporate world knows that there's a clock ticking over their heads. We are not used to focusing on older people
Hmm.
as potential anything. So they don't get developed, they don't get trained, they don't get invested in, they don't get upskilled because we think they're heading towards retirement and out the door in a few short years. That is part of our, there's always a lag between the way things have always been done and the way things need to be adapted to this new reality. And I think we're very imprinted, and all our systems are completely imprinted by the old three-stage, three-phase of life model, where you worked till you were 65, and then you retired off a cliff edge from one day to the next. And in the US, half of employees over 50 today don't work consistently full time through their 50s.
Mm.
That's a mix of all kinds of reasons, health reasons, employer, getting rid of them reasons, not finding the right kind of match. And that's just a catastrophe for them individually because they don't have enough money to age well, and for companies because that's a real lack of manpower in a relatively stretched economy, right? Unless the robots really come and really come quickly for all of our jobs, which some people are saying they are, we're going to need our older folk and our older workers, and we're going to need them now.
So you brought up something there, Aviva, I wanted to actually get into. So thankfully we're here already, and that is sort of the worker themselves. And it seems whether it's EU data, UK data, Canada data, US data, that those that are currently 55 and up, the median savings levels seem, I suppose, paltry at best. And again, depending on what study you read, it would dawns on me that there are many individuals that not just want to continue to work for thriving intellectual health, curiosity, collaboration, connection, but that have to work. And so are organizations, first, Aviva, doing kind of a disservice by not helping the individuals see how much effort still required of them to work because they're going to have to work?
There are three players in the longevity game. There are governments and government policy, there are companies, employers, and there are individuals themselves. I would say in the series of who is waking up to this issue first, I would probably put governments first. They've been worrying about this for quite a long time. They know that there's a pension crisis ahead.
Yeah.
They're sitting on the demographic studies. It's just that you can't get elected and talk about this stuff in the same breath because basically they know we are all going to be working into our 70s at least, and no, we don't have the pensions we need to live and sustain ourselves
Mm.
until through our longer lives, longer and healthier
Yeah.
lives generally. The second group, I would say, is waking up partially are individuals. We're kind of cottoning on. We are reading the paper, and some of us realize, and a lot of people are doing a lot of things to manage longevity and health. They're exercising, they're eating better, they're drinking a bit less, they're trying to sleep. All of this health consciousness, part of it is the young, part of it is the old who would like to age a bit better. Not everyone. So we have these two branches of how people age, right? And how aware individuals are. I think a lot of individuals are not yet grasping the issue that they will live much longer than they're currently thinking. They're going
Hmm.
to live longer than their parents, who are already living longer than they thought they would. And I don't think we're quite consistently bridging that awareness gap of individuals. It's coming, we're working on it. The laggards, I would say, in this mix are the business sector, the companies and the employers, because they don't want to, because it's not yet hitting their bottom lines. It's not yet really a talent crunch, and they are probably hoping that AI is going to take this issue off their table anyway. So I also just think it's new. This is people who have been in this space for 30 years really hate it when I say that. But to me, as I say, this is a relatively new topic for the business world. It is hitting now, and I think it will become a major focus, both on the talent side and the consumer side, over the next decade and more, because we have no choice.
Okay, I'm all pro for this, as you know. So if I can summarize, we have sort of an ageism issue. We have for women as well, still an ageism plus gender issue. We have the good news is that we're living longer and we're healthier, yet we're perhaps not saving as well as we ought to be. We have sort of bit of leadership blindness when it comes to the economic potential, but also the talent misappropriation of experience, et cetera, in the organization. So it's a big file of misses, but there's probably some hits, meaning like there's probably some examples that you have or files that you've worked on that where you do see progress. So let's start with the first. What's the easiest one that an organization at a leadership level should be thinking about and actually taking action with right now?
I'd say the very first step is to get it on your exco radar.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty simple. If you have not had a conversation at exco level about how and what you should be doing about developing a longevity strategy, you're basically missing a growth strategy. It's kind of a priority, and you have to bring to that conversation a really good review of all your data, your internal data. What does your talent look like? What age is it? How many, what percentage of your employees are over 50? What percentage of your employees are 10 years from retirement? What do they know that you need to start managing succession plans for? How engaged are your over 50 employees compared to your under 50? Lots of data that you can kind of prepare for this conversation. And on the consumer side, which is the low-hanging fruit short-term
Yeah.
benefit, you got to know what percentage of your consumers and potential consumers are over 50. Have you segmented the over 50 population into more than just the one or two buckets that it currently sits in compared to the 10 or 20 for the under 50s? And do you know what those consumers want? Do you understand who they are, what they want, and what their motivations are, and how that differs from the under 50? And if you don't have all that data, it's time to go and get it.
So speaking of data, there's a sort of a, as you I hope agree with, we'll see. There's an immediate-ish issue, there's a medium-term issue, and there's a very long-term issue when it comes to plummeting birth rates. And whilst we can get into immigration if you like, but
Not long term, that's like now.
right,
Birth rates.
exactly. That's where I'm going. So what we have with these plummeting birth rates is, and it's been happening for obviously a long time since I guess 1964-ish, since the end of the boomers.
Since the
The
pill was
pipeline,
invented in
yeah,
19.
exactly. So the pipeline of talent, particularly leadership talent. We've got the obviously the inverted triangle now, where we're having larger groups of organ or people that are sort of older than we do on the younger side. So where I'm going with this is, isn't that sort of a red flag there in and of itself, where we just talking about leadership competence and the transfer of succession and leadership, do we not need to be thinking about how talent is not just procured, but developed and also retained so organizations don't lose both the fluidity of new and innovative ideas, but also the continuity of experience?
Yes. I mean,
Fair
I
enough.
think talent, again, I think we are simply in old frames, right? We're used to, in most organizations, we're used to one career shape, which,
Mm,
by the way, women have been fighting for the last 30 years, which is
right.
you start in at the bottom and you work in this linear, unbroken, upwardly mobile way into leadership, and then you stop at one given date and age, going from 200% to zero overnight. That pattern is baked into recruitment systems, retention systems, career management systems, leadership development. And until it's become an exco agenda that, oh my God, there's this whole new demographic shape of our countries and our world, we're not changing the system and the model that we're pushing the sausage through, otherwise known as human capital. And we have to adapt the model. We had to adapt it for gender balance. And by the way, companies that adapted to women and women's career pacing and shapes are way better prepared to manage the age issue
Mm.
because they're very parallel. But we've got to get over this idea that people are going to stop working at a very early age compared to our life expectancy. And there are a number of countries that are now tying retirement, legal retirement ages to life expectancy in their country, which I think will be the kind of de facto policy of the future.
I suppose that's needed, necessary, about time. In fact, because where pension plans were set for 65 back in the day when we thought we'd live to 65, there would be sort
It's
of
been
a
going on for quite some time. I mean, even in France, that everybody's laughing about and just does not understand the data and what that government's been doing, has been adjusting its retirement age upwards. And by the way, the retirement age in France is almost the same as it is in Germany. There's
right.
very little difference between those two countries or policies. The retirement age is actually 67 and moving upwards. People just don't understand that.
Now, if I actually turn the lens on yourself, what I wanted to tackle was what some of like universities have these days are these programs whereby call it mid-career, you can call it and define it as you see fit, Aviva, but these sort of opportunities to go in and take a look at oneself and to reflect, reset, and renew. And so I wanted to sort of poke around a little bit. What prompted you to take what you did? It was Harvard, I'm not mistaken, and then the learnings of that. And then what I wanted to do is ask you later, is it something organizations should be really thinking about to run in their organizations? Let's start the lens on you. The reason for doing it and what you learn out of that.
Well, I went to Harvard. Harvard was the pioneering program among universities. It started 15 years ago with what it calls its Advanced Leadership Initiative, which I nickname the old program. And it's basically for people with 30 years experience who want to move into more purposeful social impact roles in their second half, latter decades of their careers. And so I had spent much of the pandemic sitting, writing, and researching in a little barn in the English countryside, all about longevity. I had read a book called The 100-Year Life that really kind of woke me up to this issue. And I was doing all this research and realizing that no, I was not going to start preparing for a retirement at 60, that actually my gift to myself was going to be a year at Harvard in this program to deepen my study of what was going on and what would be needed to address it. And part of that, I wrote a series of Forbes pieces on all the universities in the world that are developing these programs. There are now more than 15, not very many. Most of them are in the US. There's
Mhm.
Oxford University started and St. Gallen in Switzerland.
Hmm.
It led me to start a longevity leadership program for executives at Católica Lisbon that you were mentioning. And so it gave me a gift of a laboratory of people, the 50 people I went through this program with, who were all midlife transitionists, as I call
Mhm.
them, and two, an insight in what do they need at this age and stage in order to transition successfully into something that they would consider more meaningful or desirable at that age and stage. And it was fascinating. And plus, when you go to these programs, you can audit anything going on in the entire university, which is sort of the ultimate gift when you're at our age and stage. Is learning is such a joy, and being able to interact with some of the best professors in the world is honey to a bunch of wakening bears.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So if I'm toast and hoping that that honey's provided on said toast in the morning for brekkie, is this again something that the exco, the CHRO, even the CLO of organizations should be thinking about, and whether that is partnering up with one of those 15 or several, if they're MNC or not. It's the thinking, I guess, right? Sort of that age diverse workforce thinking, the mid career, the ale, if you will. How should organizations really be complementing that type of thinking that's come out of higher ed?
Well, I think some of them are. I've done some case studies on an insurance company in the UK that started a whole fashion for this called Aviva, not me, but an insurance company that stole my name.
Yeah.
Uh, and they introduced a number of years ago something called the midlife MOT in the UK. Your annual car checkup is called an MOT.
Yeah.
And so they used that metaphor for this program, and they allowed all their employees 50 plus to come into it and get basically a workshop on what were they going to do with the second half of their lives, both professionally, economically, and in any other way that they wanted to address. And it was so popular, it was oversubscribed as soon as it appeared. And the number one request of people who went through it was, I wish I'd done it 10 years earlier. If I'd known this at 40, I would have had more time to prepare the transition towards
Ah.
this new, longer second half of life. And the insurance company has worked with the UK government to actually roll out midlife MOTs across the country in job centers all over. So I think this idea that what companies could do has been well road tested, to continue the metaphor, and it just needs to be spread. I think companies really already, many of them have known that they need to upskill and reskill employees quite regularly as change just takes over. But now they're just going to have to keep doing it for much longer. And yes, should they partner with universities to do that? I mean, universities are a whole other topic that you haven't asked me about, but I could go on. They will have to entirely change their model because their market, the 18 to 20-year-old college student, is drying up. So there are a number of universities across the US shutting because they don't have enough young people. That means their new client is going to be humans of all ages. And what suite of products they develop, or what kind of subscription models you might see emerging, that you can go back to school every 10 years or so to upgrade a bit.
Well, I do love
Coming.
that. I love that idea because when you think about even your neck of the woods, where elementary schools are closing, and high schools are having to consolidate in parts of Western Europe or Canada, in terms of the population decrease in certain areas, right? Rural, some urban, of course. I think
Yep.
last data I looked at, something like 50,000 less elementary school based children in the London jurisdiction, and schools are wondering what to do. So you're right. The entire education spectrum from K-12 through to higher ed are going to have a rethink on this, right?
Huge,
Yeah.
huge. And again, that's a leadership issue for the excos, and universities are run slightly differently. And I don't think it's quite gotten to all of that it's not on their agenda quite either yet. It's coming, but
Hmm.
this is
Okay.
new.
So you talked about you touched on it, and I actually want to ask. And so there is this ridiculous myth that the older worker, the 50 plus, is sort of incapable of utilizing technology. And I think that sort of adds to the ageism and the regression in thinking of younger folk when intergenerationally having to work with older individuals. So is it incumbent upon, again, the XCO, the CHRO, the CLO, the ways in which that both kind of internal culture, policy, the way in which that we train people, are we missing the opportunity, or do you see hope that organizations are refitting sort of the double entendre there of ageism and technology, and how really the train left the station, but we need to be doing something perhaps more about it because of these underlying issues?
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, I use the comparison with gender again because it's what we had to do with women, right? Can
Mm,
women actually do anything? Well, yes, we've discovered that they, despite all our natural, millennia of sexism and women don't work and women don't know how to think and women don't learn and they can't, lift things and all the stereotypes that we had, it took decades to get companies to integrate them, train them, and move them into leadership, right? I think we have exactly the same challenges with this vast new group of older people who, until recently, the corporate mantra has been that they're expensive, they're a bit old, they're a bit slower to learn, and they're not worth it. We can get more younger people who are cheaper, faster, etc. It's just that that corollary is no longer true.
Right.
And these corporate systems are simply designed for the old pyramid when we are now this demographic square. So when we, is it a company, what's the process for companies to do that? Again, it's not to start necessarily an ERG or an affinity group for older people. That's not really gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
You have to get leaders on board, prepared and ready to lead what's going to become a pretty big shift in their organizations. You need to get cultures to adapt and, pretty consciously and mindfully build intergenerational teams devoid of ageism. And three, you're going to have to adapt all our systems, talent management systems and consumer facing systems, to build on the opportunity that these new and longer lives are opening up for all of us. It's a lot of fun, but you got to get started and you got to start right. And yelling about ageism and complaining about, how this is really not fair is not usually the best way to start what is one of the biggest changes of our lifetime.
I could talk to you for hours, it seems, and hopefully we get a chance to clink a glass when we see each other at the Drucker Forum. My last question for you, Aviva, is this. What gives you hope on this file? Is there examples or is there a movement? Is it something where you're seeing light between the cracks?
Oh no, this is all light. No, I'll flip that question. It's science in the 20th century has gifted us an extra 3 or 4 decades of existence. Do I think that's light? I think that's an extensive rainbow that I intend to flourish in. I talk a lot about 4 quarter lives, that we now have these 4 chapters that are each 25 years long
Mm.
of our potentially 100-year lives. And the new piece that you and I are enjoying and discovering is the 3rd quarter. It's these 25 years after 50 that are newly healthy, newly active, wonderfully engaged, something our parents didn't enjoy in the same way. And it's turning out to be one of the rather sweeter times of life that I've ever experienced. And I bet you too, and many people that I speak to. It's a huge opportunity for women to emerge from the crazy juggling act of what I call Q2, when they had to, do everything and care for everybody. And here suddenly empty nesting and the horizon clears and you could just work and thrive and take off. It's a fantastic opportunity. I'm a good example of that, and I am not alone. If you look at the 100 most powerful women in the world on the Forbes list, 80% of them are over 50 and in Q3. So is there light? Yeah, Dan, there's nothing but light. Enjoy it.
What a gracious and awesome answer. Here's to Q3 and better quarter threes for everyone out there. Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, this has been just fantastic. Thank you so much. Where can we find out more about you and your great work?
Oh, if you look up my name, you can find websites, my podcast, 4 Quarter Lives. That's weekly, will feature all kinds of longevity topics, and my weekly Substack, Elderberries, where you can accompany me on the exploration of all things Q3.
Love it. Well, again, Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, an absolute pleasure. 21st century leadership wizard when it comes to all things future work and careers on this file of longevity. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening or watching, everyone. It's been another episode of me, Dan Pontefract, on Leadership Now. We'll see you next time.